before we get into the future of everything, or the future of genetics specifically, I'd like to talk a little bit about the past and the present. It's been about a year since you relaunched the health product. Can you tell us how that's doing, and what's the customer demand like, and what are people most interested in finding out?
So as background for everybody, we launched about 10 years ago, and with the mission that we wanted to provide you with all kinds of information about what would be interesting for you in your health and your ancestry. And in 2012, I think it was, in 2013, we got a warning letter from the FDA, and we had to stop returning health information to our customers. And we got an approval about 18 months ago to return back the carrier status information. So things like cystic fibrosis, we got an approval for blooms, but they gave us the whole category of carrier status. So we have other reports like saturated fat, so whether or not, like in this meal, how much saturated fat is in there. Some of you are more likely to gain weight from that meal than others. And so if you had the report, you would know. And things like lactose intolerance. And without a doubt, so the relaunch has been successful. People are excited. They want the health information. But without a doubt, people want genetic information that they probably otherwise can't get from their physician. So things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, drug response. So we see that there's tons of consumer interest in that area, and it's just not out yet. And that's what we're working pretty hard to try and get.
Well, you've also launched the Pure Ancestry test, right, for $99. What are people more interested in? They want to know where they came from, or what's wrong with them?
The thing that I always made the decision that we don't want to look at genetics as just one area or another, that in some ways genetics information is so new that if I can just get you enticed for whatever reason that you actually want your genetic information, and if that's a health reason or an ancestry reason, you get involved in that specific area, but then we teach you about the others, and that becomes really interesting for people. So you might start for ancestry, but then you continue to stay on and engage because there's health information.
So that's a bit of what you're doing now. Let's talk about something you decided not to do. You're working on something called next generation sequencing. Did I get that right? We were working on that. And you decided not to recently. What is it, and why were you doing it, and why did you decide not to?
So a few things. So what we do is, genetics is complicated, and it's only back in sort of 2000, 2003 timeframe that we actually knew that we sequenced the genome for the first time. And here we have 3 billion base pairs in each of us, and it's this code of 4 base letters, and we have no idea exactly how to interpret this. So we're starting to understand some of these things, but we don't really understand all the complexities. So there's some mutations that we know, like Delta 508, which is associated with cystic fibrosis, and whether or not you're a carrier for cystic fibrosis. And so we understand that. We understand what you do with it. But there's lots of mutations, for instance, in the BRCA genome, in the BRCA gene, which is associated with breast cancer, where it confers some kind of increased risk, but you don't know exactly how much risk. And so if I told you, like, oh, you have this, a 10% potentially, you have this mutation, and it might actually cause breast cancer, but we don't know, potentially it's only 10% penetrant, meaning only 10% of individuals actually go on to get it. What actually should you do? And that's one of the things that's the big question in sequencing. Exactly what do you do with a lot of the information that is coming out there? And so 23andMe, we decided that as a company, we're really focused on direct to consumer. So without a doubt, we are a consumer product. We're not going through a physician. There is no other company out there that is direct to consumer. Everyone else has a physician interface, and that is core to us. And at the same time, we want to give information to individuals where there's not ambiguity, where we can say, we know Delta 508, this mutation, that actually is associated with, being a carrier for cystic fibrosis. And so we don't want to get into that complicated area where we don't necessarily know exactly how to interpret that information, but we might potentially, have our customers, we might point them at some point into another area. But the direct-to-consumer focus for us is key to what's unique about us and to our success.
So discontinuing that next generation work, was that a big setback for you? How many people You had to lay off.
I don't see it as a setback at all. I see it as like a company that really got to understand a new area and decided that we are going to focus and we're going to prioritize. And I think that what people should understand, it's the technology behind it. I might question, like, if somebody decided, if there's a little startup company and they decide, they're going to buy a bunch of servers and then they go to Watson, and was that overpowered for what they were trying to accomplish? And that's essentially analogous to what we were trying to do, is that it's sort of next generation sequencing is without a doubt the hot, shiny object, but what you're going to do with all that information is an incredibly complicated area to get into. And I think that's where consumers today, like the majority of you, actually raise your hand if you've been genotyped yet. Okay, so there's a decent number of you, but a lot of you, this is a pretty tech-savvy crowd, a lot of you still have not. And so there's a whole new world. Like, a lot of people just don't understand the basics of genetic information, and that's one of the huge priorities I see for the next few years is getting people to understand the basics of what does genetic information mean, what are the limitations, what can you actually do with all this information. And I think there's a whole world that's going to come with sequencing, but I think that the success for genetic companies will be when we focus on what we're going to do best and make sure that we're actually executing well there. And our focus, without a doubt, is on the direct-to-consumer market and providing and engaging people with genetic information broadly, and that there are other tests out there. If you find that you have this family history for breast cancer and you talk to your physician and you go through all of the different steps, and it's an incredibly complicated process, there are other companies out there that are going to be a lot more expensive and better suited to doing that.
Why is disintermediating the physician so important? Why is it so vital to you to go direct to consumer?
I think a huge part, one of the huge parts about healthcare that I almost find just insulting to us is that there are so many healthcare decisions that you are not actually part of. And that you, the consumer, as much as like you're actually the one who's getting the healthcare treatment, no one's actually asking you what you want. And I find that there's a real, there's something just insulting about this process, that you very rarely go to the physician and say, here's your 4 options. These ones are going to cost this amount. These are going to cost this amount. There's not a sort of customer focus in healthcare. And one thing I learned when I was investing in India is that there was this much more consumer-driven healthcare. Like, you walked in, I would walk into somewhere like Apollo Health, which is the largest hospital chain, and I'd say, I need an MRI for my wrist, and they would just do it. It was amazing, and it was, like $100. Like, it was affordable. And you think about a company that owns a multi-million-dollar machine, like an MRI machine. They don't run it from 9 to 5 the way they do in most hospitals. They run it for as many hours as they can, where there's a market, because it functions like a more normal market. And I think part of what I want, I'm a huge believer that if people are more connected to the decisions that are being made in healthcare about themselves, they're actually going to be healthier. And I think that all of us as healthcare consumers in the United States have almost been treated like communist patients. Like, you're not taught to think for yourself. You're taught to walk into the doctor's office and they tell you what to do. They know what you should do. And there was a study that came out about how 50% of people go and they get a procedure, like something invasive in their body, and they don't know why.
So getting the genetic testing armed with that information, you think people can sort of negotiate better with the healthcare
I think
system?
that the genetic information for me is sort of the beginning. Like, what I see is so important about 23andMe is, one, I think genetic information is critical to your health and to prevention. But 2, it's the tip of the iceberg of people waking up and realizing that you're actually in charge of your own health, and that what you do every single day impacts your health. And that health, in some ways, is not about the annual doctor checkup where you say, are you healthy or are you sick? But it's the decision that you make every day when you go to Target or Walmart or Whole Foods. Like, what are you exercising? That's what you're doing every single day.
So you talked about your experience with the FDA regulatory processes. I think that gives you a...
Ooh, it's hot.
Yeah, it gets hot and cold. It gives you a unique perspective on the Theranos drama. What do you think is the biggest lesson of that whole affair?
So So a couple things I've learned. So we're sort of the poster child because we did get shut down for a period of time, or not completely shut down, but we were asked to stop returning health information. And that Silicon Valley is not known. Like, you go to Silicon Valley because you want innovation and, creativity. You don't go because you want regulatory expertise or, policy expertise. And without a doubt, there was part of us that just didn't necessarily understand how the regulatory environment worked. And I realized, as much as we were doing sort of our best efforts, we didn't necessarily understand complete regulatory speak. It was definitely a language beyond us. That said, there is a confusion in the marketplace about how diagnostics are regulated. So, for instance, the reason why we are the only direct-to-consumer genetic testing company is because that requires us to be regulated by the FDA. Other companies that are out there that have a physician interface are regulated by Medicare. And it's a different regulatory process to be regulated by Medicare than it is to be regulated by the FDA. And they're different stringencies. And so what happened with Theranos has all kinds of, had all kinds of issues. And I'd say transparency is sort of one of the biggest. Like, people want to know how things are happening. But without a doubt as well, there is a disconnect in terms of how should diagnostics be regulated. And there is something out there, there's a proposal out there called LDT guidance, where they are proposing that the FDA is going to regulate all the diagnostic tests that you're getting. So today, when you go to a LabCorp or a Quest and you draw blood, those are not regulated. Majority of those are not regulated by the FDA, and the FDA is saying we would like to. And there are pros and cons to that, but it will set a bar and it'll make it clear for everybody about what are the standards that actually need to happen. And I think someone like Theranos, it shows an example of where it was able to sort of function in a regulatory system that didn't have the same level of scrutiny because there is this confusion in the marketplace. And I think one of the biggest challenges they always had was that transparency. And to me, part of what saved 23andMe and everything is that we've always published. We have over 50 publications out there. We have worked incredibly hard to make sure that we have credibility with the scientific community, that people know what we're doing, that we're engaging with science, that we're engaging with our customers. We, by definition, require that our partners, when they do publish, that they make a best effort to be in an open access journal so that all of you who've participated in research can actually read the research that you contributed to.
You talked a little bit earlier about what you're working on, what more you're working on adding to the product. Can you elaborate on that? Take us out 5 or 10 years. What do you hope to be able to do for your customers, for all of us, that you're not able to do now?
I think that there's, when I talk to customers, and it's been 10 years now of talking to customers, people without a doubt say that they want to understand how better and better to live their lives. And I think that there is an aspect of your health that you get when you go to your doctor. Like, you go usually when you have an issue, when there's something specific. And at the same time, there's a huge area of wellness where we're all questioning, what is it that you should eat? Is decaffeinated coffee, is it really bad for you? Is organic really good for you? Is bacon really bad? It was just the cover of Time magazine that bacon is bad. So all kinds of things people want.
Bacon is good again.
No. I think it was bad. But I'm sure if you wait a year, I'm sure it will be good. Right. And so I think part of it is that people do want to understand how should they actually live their lives. And wellness is a big priority for us. And I think it's something that we think about. We are reflective of what our consumers want. And our consumers are really interested in diet. They're really interested in exercise. And they want more and more information about what is the genetic. Why is it that some people can eat a ton, like huge meals, and not gain weight, and some people do gain weight? And so are there genetic differences? And so what I love for 23andMe is that we really are the voice of the consumer, and that all of you today in the current system, you don't really have the ability to influence what Pfizer is going to go and run a clinical trial on. But you do have the ability to influence how we're doing research and what topics we're doing research on. And so, for instance, we actually did the largest study on sexual orientation because our customers, it was the #1 study our customers wanted us to do. And I think that there is this whole world of crowdsourcing research that we will be able to empower all of you to have a voice in. And we had a paper that just came out on depression. And the beauty of this paper was that it was 450,000 of our customers who participated in this study. And so there's no other way that you could do a study of 450,000 people for a reasonable cost unless it's online and unless it's crowdsourced in this way. So I think what I'm most excited about, I think one is this ability to really pursue wellness and what consumers want. And I think two is that we give consumers the ability to really influence research and make discoveries that are actually going to be meaningful to them.
So if you take this out way in the future, there's been some dystopian visions of what you can do with genetic information, Gattaca, Brave New World. That's obviously far, far away from what you're talking about, but there are lines, it seems like, that need to be drawn. This information can be empowering, but what people do with it, it seems like, we can overstep. Where do you think the lines need to be drawn and how we use this information?
I think there's a lot of... I think that it kind of lives in the realm. It's great sci-fi. I have other things that I really worry about other than this. And I've had people who've come and they're like, one day there's going to be like robot zombies that programmed to kill. And I had to say, I was like, listen, we can't even, we know the genetic mutations of Huntington's and cystic fibrosis, and we haven't cured those yet. So there's a ways to go still. So I understand, and I without a doubt, I think that there's some of the concerns. It's not as much near term. To me, the near term issues that really do come up is that you might decide, for instance, you might have a family history of Huntington's, and you might not want to know what your results are. But let's say you have siblings that do. And so by definition, you're connected to everybody. And so the definition of privacy starts to change, because when one member of a family learns something, it actually does have an impact on other family members. And so those are some of the most interesting sort of ethical dilemmas that we have. And those are the realistic things that I see coming up. That, and also things like non-paternity and, sperm donors who donated under, privacy clauses that, now you can start to find these individuals. Those are some of the issues I think that you start to really see. But the world of sort of cyborgs and sort of crazy things coming, I think is still in the realm of science fiction.
Okay. So what are people supposed to do with this information? If you find out you have a certain trait, and then maybe you fall in love with someone and they have that trait, and so there's more likelihood that you could pass it on, and it's not a good trait. What are genetic counselors telling people to do in those situations? Is it just that you need to be prepared for what might come, or?
Well, I think a couple things. So, for instance, if you and your partner were both carriers for cystic fibrosis, you have two choices. You could say, we want to do IVF, and we want to choose an embryo that we know does not carry cystic fibrosis. Or you can say, we understand that there's a risk element, and we're better prepared. And I think there's a fair amount of data out there to support that parents who know that there is a risk of having a child with a condition, or that the child then does end up having that condition, they manage the disease that much better. And so I think that that's where more and more is people, what we find, when people are prepared with information, they execute better on their actions.
I'm going to give people in the audience a chance to ask questions in just 1 minute. Let me
Eager.
quickly ask one more myself. So you have over 1 million customers?
Over 1 million, yeah.
And something like 80% of them have agreed to let you use their data for research. Mm-hmm. What is the most exciting thing you're doing with that, beyond giving the information back to the patients? When you aggregate that data, what are you doing with it? Mm-hmm.
So for me, the excitement when we started the company was this hypothesis of big data and clinical. I think people don't necessarily realize how much clinical trials are. So these little tiny fiefdoms, and every academic center is a little tiny fiefdom, and there's not a lot of sharing. And there's only so big that one clinical trial can be, or only so many psoriasis patients that can possibly go to Stanford. And so one of the great joys for me was this idea that I can bring together the world, and everyone, like, you all own your health information and you own your genetic information, and so we can essentially create the world's largest study. And if we have all this information, what's the limitation of what we could actually discover? And I was at a dinner back when we were starting this in 2005, where I was talking to the scientists, and I was like, what if you had the world's genetic information and all the world's medical records? He's like, well, you'd solve everything. I was like, well, let's do it. And that's essentially so that was the hypothesis when we started the company. And the huge pleasure I have is just how much it actually is paying out, how much we can actually make discoveries that are truly just spectacular. And last year, we ended up hiring Richard Scheller, who is the former head of R&D from Genentech, and we actually are looking at all the data that we have, that we've essentially crowdsourced, and can we actually make medications? Can we make truly novel therapeutics that are going to have a huge impact on the lives of our customers? And what I find is that it's hugely rewarding for our customers. And we did a big project in Parkinson's disease with Genentech, and the joy, there was this nervousness of, will customers, how will they feel about us doing all the pharma partnerships? And there was an overwhelming appreciation that I have Parkinson's disease. I want pharma to work on it. I want Harvard to work on it. I want everyone to work on it. And I'm frustrated that if I participate in a clinical trial with Harvard, they're owning all my data. They won't share it. And if I work with Genentech, they're owning all my data. But if they're part of 23andMe, we're doing partnerships with all these different groups to try to make sure that your data can be used in as many places as possible. And what I really want to do is foster more competition. So we are working to develop our own therapeutics now, and we have roughly six candidates that we're actually going to be pursuing to actually develop into therapeutics. And if the whole system works, if I can successfully show that I can crowdsource research and then develop therapeutics that have a better success rate than the industry standard, and most drugs today, the reason why it costs $3 billion, $2 billion to develop a drug is because most drugs fail. And so one of the best things I can do is show that by starting with human data, and having all these consumers participating in research, that I can have a higher success rate, and that I can actually develop those therapeutics much faster.
Okay, let's go to the audience.
Hi, Mickey from Maya. So how does Veritas Genetics out of George Church's lab, the personal genome thing at Harvard, how does it differ from what 23andMe is doing, and how is it the same? I thought it had a direct-to-consumer model as well.
I think Veritas used to be Nomi, and I'm forgetting if that was actually the right. So they are not. There's no one else that has a direct-to-consumer label. And so everyone else, I think what they do is they do sort of an easy access physician. So you have to get it ordered by a physician, or it has to be returned through a physician. But it is not cleared by the FDA. It is not a true direct-to-consumer product. So, for instance, we are on TV. We've been in retail. There is no other product that has that ability to actually go direct to the consumer.
Anyone else in the audience? Dennis.
Hi. What did the results of the depression and sexual orientation studies show?
So on the depression study, actually, I think I can't remember if it was 12 or 15 novel variants that we found. And what's exciting for those is it helps understand and elucidate the biology behind depression. And when you start to understand the biology behind it, then you have the ability to potentially look at look at all those different areas of your genes and say, could I target those ever for a drug? And I think part of it is that the reality for a lot of therapies today that you can all relate to is that they don't work for everyone. So depression is one of those areas where most people take a medication and it doesn't work. And so you end up cycling through. And the hope here with a lot of this is that we'll find novel targets, and that in the future more and more drugs will be personalized for people with a specific genetic variant. In the sexual orientation, that is one of the most interesting. We did not find anything, but it is a priority for me and the company to see whether or not we could actually do another analysis and get that out.
What are you looking for?
We're looking to see, is there a genetic variant associated with specific, sexual orientation? And so we did not see anything, but it was again, this is probably 5-6 years ago that we did the study, but we had 70,000 people participating in it. And we published the early, the results of the study, which didn't show anything significant I think it was the American Society of Human Genetics, but it was significant. The capacity was 70,000 people. And I think now we could actually do it again and look to see if there's something else. And it could just be a question of, we have a lot more power now than we did before.
Are you going to do it again?
Yeah, that's been one of the things I've wanted to. We always think about event like for, again, we haven't said for sure that we're gonna do it, but for a holiday next year or for gay pride kind of event, that would be a really interesting study to try to get out.
Forward to it. Thank you very much, Anne.
Thank
It's been
you.
Very interesting.